Have you ever wanted to learn something new? You know, play the guitar, speak a language, maybe code an app, but you stopped before you even started because the timeline just felt like a total mystery? Well, today we're going to demystify that. We're going to unpack a professional method that can turn that big cloud of uncertainty into a clear, actionable plan. Let's dive in.
I mean, this is the ultimate question, isn't it? We've all been there. Whether you're trying to pick up a new hobby or you're training for a completely new career, that big unknown, how long is this going to take? That can be the biggest hurdle. Most of us, we just kind of guess. Or even worse, we get so discouraged by the unknown that we never even start.
For a long time, the conversation has really been dominated by two extremes. You've got the super daunting 10,000-hour rule on one side, which, let's be honest, sounds like a decade of your life. And on the other, you've just got pure blind guesswork. But there is a third way. Professionals, you see, they don't guess. They use a structured method to actually estimate learning time.
So, first up, let's solve the mastery time mystery. We're going to unpack the framework that can take you from just a vague dream to a real, concrete timeline.
What's really interesting is that the system we're exploring comes from a pretty unexpected place: physical education program design. But when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. Coaches and teachers have to get a whole class of students from zero to competent in a single semester. They absolutely cannot afford to just guess.
So this brings us to a framework for learning. What these professionals use is a framework to calculate something called mastery time. And what's so cool about it is that it's a process literally anyone can apply to their own goals.
At its core, mastery time calculation is, well, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It's a way to estimate the total time it'll take to master all the little individual pieces of a much bigger skill. And that's the key right there. We stop looking at the entire mountain we have to climb, and instead, we start focusing on the individual steps it takes to get to the top.
Okay, so how do we actually do this? How do we put this into practice? Let's walk through the step-by-step guide to building your very own learning timeline.
It all breaks down into 4 really clear steps. First, you're going to categorize your objectives, basically break the big skill down. Second, you estimate the time for each little piece. Third, you average those estimates to get a more reliable number. And finally, you add it all up. That's your timeline. Let's really look at that first step. So instead of a huge, vague goal like learn guitar, you break it down into smaller objectives. You might have a category for technical skills. That's things like how to hold the pick or form a chord. And then maybe cognitive skills for things like reading music. Right away, the goal feels so much less intimidating, right?
Now for step 2. The idea is to have a few different people, or you could just try this yourself on different days, independently estimate how long each little task will take. The key is independently, so you don't bias each other. So for example, for learn C chord, one person thinks it'll take 30 minutes, another says 20, and a third says 40. That variation is not only normal, it's actually exactly what we want for the next step.
And that brings us to step 3, where we average those numbers out. See that average time column? For that C chord, those different estimates of 30, 20, and 40 minutes now become one single, much more reliable average of 30 minutes. You do this for every single objective, and you start to get a really realistic picture of the time it's actually going to take.
And finally, you just add it all up. In our little guitar example, we land on a total estimated time of 210 minutes. That's 3.5 hours. All of a sudden, learning basic guitar isn't this vague, lifelong dream. It's a 3.5-hour project. And that right there, that's the power of this whole process. It turns ambiguity into a real number you can work with.
But of course, there's always the human factor. A plan is a map. It's not a perfect prediction. We're humans, not robots, which means things are always a little messy. And the people who design this method, they know that. They actually require professionals using this system to stop and think about this exact point. They have to consider the real-world challenges that can totally change the timeline. So this isn't a flaw in the system. It's a crucial part of using it correctly.
So what kind of factors are we talking about? Well, stuff like your prior experience. If you already play piano, you'll probably pick up guitar faster. The quality of your instruction matters a lot. Do you have access to good resources, like a decent instrument? And maybe the biggest ones of all, your own motivation and how consistent you are with practice. Any one of these can stretch or shrink that timeline.
So here's the key thing to remember. This number, it's not some rigid deadline you have to hit. Think of it as a realistic baseline. It's a starting point. It gives your journey a structure to begin with, a plan that you can then adapt as you go.
So,
This brings us to the final and maybe most important part. Why does any of this matter? Why go to all this trouble? Well, in a word, it's about control. It's about taking control of your own learning journey. Because a good plan, it does something that feels, well, it feels kind of magical. It transforms the question in your head from if I can learn this to when I will learn this. And that tiny shift in perspective, it changes everything. When you boil it all down, this is the power of a plan. It takes a huge, overwhelming goal and it chops it up into manageable steps. It gives you a realistic timeline you can actually see yourself achieving, and as you check off those small objectives, you build momentum, you build motivation, and most important of all, it gives you a clear path forward so you always know exactly what you need to do next.
So, I'll just leave you with this to think about. What's that one skill you've always wanted to learn? What's the thing you would finally start today if you knew, with confidence, exactly how long it was going to take to master?